Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens. Today I was thinking about two of my favorite things. One of them is obviously fountain pens. The other are cats. And what would it be like if you could combine those two things into one thing? And that actually exists. It's this pen, the Fluffy Cat pen from Online Pen Company, which is a German company that started in 1991, I think before the term online really was a thing. But anyway, they were ahead of their times on that one. And they sell a lot of stationery products and pens in Europe. You can get a pen like this on Amazon, but I have not seen it in stores, and it doesn't seem to be on a lot of the American websites. I think Jet Pens sometimes carries their stuff, but they're very popular in Europe. And a friend of mine was in Europe and thought of me because they saw the fountain pen and they know I love cats, and they brought it back. And it's great. This is not the first online pen that I had. Over a year ago, I was looking through eBay and I came upon this pen, caught my eye because I thought, oh, this must be a Keith Haring pen. Keith Haring is a wonderful artist from sort of best known in the 1980s for doing graffiti-like works in the New York subway. And I've even written about his art. He died in 1990 of HIV/AIDS, and I think he's just terrific. When I got the pen, I immediately realized that it wasn't a Haring because it doesn't have his famous signature on it. After he died, his foundation, the estate, continued to make products. Haring had a pop shop during his life and loved to put things on magnets and T-shirts and sell things to mass audience. He loved the idea. It was popular. He loved kids. And these pens, by the way, this line of campus pens really are geared for kids. So that would make sense for there to be a Keith Haring pen like this. But it's more of an homage, I think, to Keith Haring. And I think it does signal the kind of audience that the German company is trying to go for. They're trying to be hip. These are pens. Remember that in Germany, kids still use fountain pens, and actually all through Europe, France, I think they still use fountain pens. And so that's a big market. So they're competing with Lamy. And so obviously these cats are meant to appeal to kids. Here actually is an example of a James Rizzi pen. James Rizzi is a contemporary of Keith Haring and also works in this kind of, you could call it neo-pop mode. Here he's directly referencing the 1960s, which is when pop art begins, and whole hippie culture. I'm thinking of Peter Max too, might be an artist that he was influenced by, but this is much, much later. So that's why I'm calling it neo-pop. And I think there is a kind of pop flavor to the Fluffy Cats design. Unfortunately, Online doesn't credit any illustrator or artists with the Fluffy Cats, but they love putting this on notepads and pen pouches and various things. It's obviously quite popular and appeals to kids. The great thing about these pens, though, they are not small. They are about the same size, almost exactly the same size as the Lamy Safari. And I think that also signals the competition. That's who they're thinking of, appealing to maybe the same audience, but sort of more brazenly appealing to kids. But anyone, they're certainly big enough to be used by somebody like me or an older teenager. When you uncap the pen, it posts very securely, and I love the way that, in fact, not only does it post, but it fits on the back of the pen perfectly, and it becomes really one beautiful object. That's a very nice detail. Also, notice the way that when it's capped, same thing happens. There's no break. And since it's a kind of wallpaper design, it's actually kind of nice the way the image kind of moves around and creates a different kind of effect. I love that. And it's very nicely done the way this comes together in this particular way. You can see the same thing here on the Rizzi version. How nice that is. It makes for a very long, tall pen, though, when you post it. But it posts very securely. This isn't going to come off. The other thing that's nice in a pen that's so inexpensive, it costs, by the way, I was able to get this for around $20 on Amazon, is the ink window. These pens actually are meant to be used with cartridge, small, either two small cartridges that will fit in the pen. I mean, use one and then you have a backup cartridge, or one long international style cartridge. They also will take a converter. There's one problem when you use the converter and you dip the pen. You'll notice that there's a little step down in the front of the pen, and so that tends to catch ink. So when you're dipping this pen in the ink, you're going to find that it may be a little bit hard to clean it off with your paper towel. So, because as I say, I think they want you, or imagine that you're going to use cartridges in a pen like that because it's so convenient at school, etc., etc. But you can use a converter. I don't know what people feel about this. It has a nice clip. The clip works fine. It has a logo here, but that's attached to something that looks like metal, but I believe is actually plastic. And there is some discussion online of this being perhaps a pen that you could eyedropper. It's not something that I really get into, so I don't know about that. Another thing that's interesting about the pen, and they've been doing these pens now for at least 7 years, putting different drawings on the same pen, which the model is called the campus model, is the material. The part that has the drawing on it is kind of rubbery. Sometimes they kind of call that ergonomic because it does feel nice in the hand. I think it feels nice. I know some people feel that it makes them feel sweaty. And then the actual section, which is very long, which I like, and again makes it more appealing to a grown-up. Rather, you see a lot of pens geared towards children, like the what am I thinking of? The Pelicano Junior, for example, has a tiny little section because it's meant for tiny little hands. In this particular case, though, the section is quite big, and it's subtly sort of sculpted to sort of tell you where your fingers should go. Somewhat similarly to the Lamy Safari, but much more subtle. And I actually like that. I think it's both giving you a guide but not forcing you in the same way that the Lamy does. I mean, I don't mind the Lamy doing that. It doesn't bother me, but I know that it does bother some people. Another thing I like is that it uses a traditional kind of nib rather than the kind of nib that's on the Lamy pen, which will only work on a Lamy pen. This is a more traditional number 5 nib, I believe, and this nib actually writes quite smoothly, and even, believe it or not, has a bit of flex. It reminds me of a nib that is on the Muji pens, which is also inexpensive, but also surprisingly has a bit of flex. Rumor has it that nib is made by Schmidt. I have no evidence to determine who makes the nibs for online, but it would make sense. It certainly says on their nib that it's made in Germany, and that might make sense that they actually, Muji and online, are usually a similar pen. They also are going after a similar price point. In terms of the rubbery material, which I don't mind, but some people might not like, I was worried a bit that it would be a kind of fingerprint magnet. It feels a little bit soft, and it may be even a little bit sticky. It's not sticky, but you feel like, well, maybe it's not going to be, hold up. It's going to get smudged and dirty, and actually in use it doesn't seem to do that. And it does. I've had 2 of these pens for quite a while, and they seem to hold up quite well. So that is interesting. I've mentioned already that it writes really well. But another thing which I'm very impressed though is that I inadvertently, both of these pens had them lost, were kind of lost. I couldn't find them for at least a month, and they both were filled with ink. And when I did find them under a pile of papers and wrote with them, they wrote instantly when I took the cap off. And that's very impressive to me. That's not true of a Lamy Safari. I mean, I have Lamy Safaris, and if I don't write with them for a few days, you have to really prime them and get them going. Both of these pens wrote immediately. And in that sense, they remind me of Platinum's Preppy pens. In some ways, the design with the ink window kind of reminds me of the Platinum Preppy, although as I say, they write much more like a Western pen than a Japanese fine pen or extra fine pen. So that really pleased me. What don't I like about them? Well, overall, as much as I like the seamlessness of the way in which they have put together the pen in such an inexpensive pen and the way in which it holds the actual drawing, the pen itself I don't think is so great looking. I'm not so wild about the plastic silver top and bottom, although it works really great in terms of the posting. So that would be something that I think is a problem. It feels very plasticky. Now, of course, the Lamy pen is entirely made. Well, not entirely made. The cap has the clip that's made of metal, but it's a plastic pen. But it looks it always looks classic, sharp. It's elegant. It's an amazing pen, in every way. It's truly, belongs in the museum, as they claim, right? This pen is not so great looking, and when you hold it in your hand, it's so light and plasticky that it feels a bit inexpensive. The designs, which I do enjoy and are kind of whimsical, in the same way, tend to make you feel that you have something that is not so expensive in your hand, right? You feel this is almost like a throwaway pen, and that's a shame because actually it writes really well. It's a good pen, but it just has a kind of lightweight quality to it, which I think has to do with the idea of a kind of disposable culture, or something which is fun, but you're not going to mind it if you lose it. One thing I did just notice that's interesting is the both these pens I think are earlier versions. The clip has a little sort of indentation. On the Fluffy Cat version, they've taken that out, and actually I think that's smart. I'm not wild about that little indentation. I think it looks better without that. They've also changed the logo a little bit. It made it silver. Here it's a different sort of gray. There's some fine details that are different. If you go online onto the website, you'll see they have dozens, it seems like dozens of different patterns that you can get, and I suppose you could collect them. If you don't like cats, they have a pen for you. They have a dog pen. I think it's a fluffy dog pen, and they have an angry animals pen. That's for people who, I guess, don't like animals at all, or if they do like animals, they like grumpy animals. So they're cute. They're great. I wonder why it is. Maybe somebody can write a comment why it is they don't make a bigger play at the American market, because I think they would be quite popular here. As always, I will do a writing sample, and then I will, of course, do a drawing of my favorite cat, Severus the Cat, who is a bit fluffy. He could be fluffier, I suppose. So how does it write? Just to remind you, it does post very well, but it becomes a really long pen when you post it. So this is online campus, And this is a fluffy cat. And this is a medium. Now, as I say, it's really amazing because the cartridge in here is the original cartridge that I got several months ago, and it just still writes really well. So this is the online blue cartridge. This is rhodia paper. There's feedback, but it's pretty smooth. And it wrote perfectly right out of the box. And here you can see, if you can see, there's a little bit of flex to it. See? So it's not a nail at all. And it's very pleasant. No skipping. It's perfect. As always, if this is useful, please remember to subscribe. I was really surprised at how beautifully these pens write, and I enjoy drawing with it because, I mean, it's not a wildly flexed nib, but it does have some bounce to it and a little bit of flex. And also it's just very reliable. It's wet, it flows well, so it's very pleasant, you know, given the fact that it's such an inexpensive pen. In terms of its writing, I think it writes as well as a Lamy Safari, let's say, and so it's a good choice from that standpoint. Drawing Severus again, I always had a little trouble with his face, and I think, as you said, started got the head a little bit cockeyed and tried to correct that towards the end of the drawing.